Today, we are cracking open the Psychologist Toolkit. And nope, we're not looking for couches or ink blots. We're looking for something way more powerful, for understanding why people do what they do. Statistics. Now I know, if that word sounds a little intimidating, just stick with me. I promise, by the end of this, you'll see it's really just a way to find clear answers in a pretty messy world.
So let's just jump right in with the real-world scenario. Imagine a psychologist comes up with a brand new, amazing learning technique. After a study, they're left with this huge mountain of test scores. How in the world do they turn all that raw data into a simple, confident answer? Yes, this really works. Or, nope, back to the drawing board. Well, that's exactly the job statistics was made for.
So here's our game plan. First, we'll look at the two main types of tools in the kit. Then, we're going to learn how to find the center of our data, and just as important, how spread out it is. After that, we'll see how those basics help researchers pick the perfect tool for the job. And then, we'll wrap it all up with the key things you'll want to remember.
First up, let's get into that data toolkit. I want you to think of this like opening the top 2 trays of a giant toolbox. These are the fundamental tools you're going to reach for almost every single time.
Inside that toolbox, you've basically got 2 main categories. On one side, you have descriptive statistics. This is all about describing the group you actually studied, the people right there in your lab. On the other side, you've got inferential statistics. This is where you get to be a bit of a detective, using clues from your small group to make a smart guess about a much larger population. For today, we're going to focus on those first building blocks, the descriptive tools.
All right, let's keep going. Now that we have our basic tools, we're going on a quest for the typical score. This is all about finding the heart, or the center, of our data. Think about it. When you're staring at that mountain of data, what's the very first question that pops into your head? It's probably something like, okay, so what does a normal result even look like here? Where's the middle of all this? Statisticians have a fancy name for this. They call it finding the central tendency. Okay, so the first, and by far the most common way to find that center is the mean. You almost certainly know this already, just as the plain old average. This is really the workhorse of statistics.
And calculating it is about as straightforward as it gets. You just add up all your scores, and then you divide by how many scores you had in the first place. So if you look at these numbers here, you add them all up, you get 33. There are 5 scores, so you divide by 5, and you get a mean of 6.6. It's really that simple.
So how's this used in the real world? Well, imagine a psychologist is studying sleep habits. Instead of looking at 30 different numbers for a student's sleep each night, they can just calculate the mean. They add up all the hours, divide by 30, and suddenly they have one single powerful number that neatly summarizes that student's whole month.
Our next tool is the median. Now this one's a little different. If you take all your scores and line them up, from the smallest to the largest, the median is the one that's sitting smack dab in the physical middle of the line. Think of it as the 50-yard line of your dataset.
And here is why the median is kind of a superhero. Imagine you're measuring reaction times, and one person gets distracted and takes like 10 seconds longer than everybody else. That one super high score would totally drag the mean upwards, but the median, it would barely even notice. It resists the pull of those extreme scores, which makes it perfect for data that's a bit lopsided, or what statisticians call skewed. And the third tool for finding the center is the mode. Honestly, this one is the easiest of them all. It's just the score that shows up most often. It's the most popular kid in your dataset. So for instance, say you've got these scores from a memory test. You just scan the list and you see the number 19 pops up way more than any other number. That's it. Your mode is 19. It just tells you the most common thing that happened. Okay, great. We now know how to find the center of our data, but that is only half the story. Now we need to figure out how to measure the spread. This tells us if our scores are all bunched up together or if they're scattered all over the place. Because really, think about it. You could have 2 classes that both have the exact same average test score, let's say 75%. But what if in one class, every single student scored between a 70 and an 80? And in the other class, the scores were all over the map, from 40s to 100s. The average alone doesn't tell you that story. That's why we have to measure the spread.
The absolute simplest way to get a feel for the spread is the range. It's just a quick snapshot of how wide your data is from end to end.
And calculating the range couldn't be easier. You just find the very highest score in your set. In this case, it's a 10. Find the very lowest. Here, it's a 2. And then you just subtract. 10 minus 2 gives us a range of 8. It's basic, sure, but it gives you a really fast first impression. Okay, now for a much more powerful tool, the standard deviation.
The name sounds a little heavy, I know, but the idea is actually pretty simple. It tells you, on average, how far each score is from the mean. So a small standard deviation means all your data points are huddled together tightly around the average. A big one means they're spread far and wide.
So, we can now describe our data. We know its center, we know its spread, but what do we do with that? How do psychologists use this to actually draw conclusions? Well, that brings us to choosing the right kind of analysis, and that often comes down to a choice between parametric and non-parametric tests.
And believe it or not, this huge decision often boils down to one simple question. Does your data look like this shape? This is the normal probability curve, but you probably know it as the famous bell curve. It's that symmetrical, bell-shaped graph where most scores are right in the middle, with fewer and fewer out at the edges. Whether your data fits this shape is a massive deal.
This slide really breaks down that big choice. Parametric tests are like high-performance race cars. They are incredibly powerful, but they need a perfect racetrack. They assume your data fits that perfect bell curve. Non-parametric tests, on the other hand, are like rugged all-terrain vehicles. They're way more flexible. They don't care about the bell curve, which makes them awesome for messier data or when you're just ranking things like good, better, and best.
Phew, we have covered a ton of ground. So let's slow down and wrap things up by summarizing the key tools that you now have in your mental toolkit. Here are the absolute essentials. First, central tendency. That's your mean, median, and mode. Tells you where the center of your data is. Second, dispersion. Using tools like the range and standard deviation tells you how spread out that data is. Third, that famous bell curve often acts as the gatekeeper for which test you should use. And finally, just remember, parametric tests have strict rules about that curve, while non-parametric tests are the flexible, come-as-you-are alternative.
So, the next time you read a news story that says something like, the average person does this, you can now start asking smarter questions. Which average are they even talking about? The mean? The median? And how spread out is the data really? With these basic tools, you're not just taking in information anymore. You can start to look at data with a critical and much more powerful eye. Thanks for tuning in.